everyone. Happy Wednesday. Thank you guys so much for joining us for another breakfast by the bay. My name is Jess, and behind the camera, as always, we have Adam, and we are coming to you live from Save the Bay's Exploration Center and Aquarium. So I just wanted to let you guys know too, starting next week, we're only doing breakfast by the bay Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. It's still at 10 a.m. and we're still coming to you with some really great content. So stay tuned for those next week. But today I'm really excited to introduce this topic to you. So we're going to be focusing on these three animals. And due to this sign, you might get a clue as to what we might be talking about today. But these animals are all different, right? They're not the same species, they're not even the same group. But what unites them and what brings them together is all of these guys have actually been into outer space. So cool. So if you guys are just tuning in, my name is Jess, and behind the camera we have Adam, and we are coming to you live from Save the Bay's Exploration Center and Aquarium. And today we're learning about these animals who have been into outer space. So before I talk about how amazing and well adapted these guys are for life in space, I wanted to talk briefly about the history of why animals are in space, why humans are in space too. So a long time ago, humans have always been curious about space exploration and travel and things of that nature. So they started early in the 1800s sending hot air balloons with different objects up to see if it could even travel into outer space. But before humans actually went up, animals started to go into outer space. So the first successful animal that was in outer space was a fruit fly, believe it or not. Not one of these guys, not any monkeys or anything like that, but a fruit fly. So it went a full vertical journey up and then came back down, still alive and intact, which was really exciting. So that fruit fly paved the way for humans to start to be able to explore and orbit into space. So humans first went into outer space and orbited the Earth in 1962. And that paved the way for exploration on the moon, which we all know happened in 1969. So after that, animals' journey in space kind of changed. So what scientists wanted to look and see is how well adapted these animals could be in an outer space situation. It helps us understand what would happen to humans, but also these guys. So the first aquanaut, which is a fish astronaut, really cool term, was a mummichog, who's actually a common resident here in Narragansett Bay. And this is a little drawing of a mummichog. And they paved the way in 1973. Not too long after, our oyster toadfish, this guy right here, came in 1998. And the reason scientists chose these two fish, not because of their good looks or anything like that, but they chose them because they can live in extreme environments. These guys aren't living on volcanoes though, they're actually living right here in Narragansett Bay. But within their habitat, they can withstand low levels of oxygen or high levels of oxygen. They can withstand different salinities or the amount of salt in water. They can live almost freshwater and super salty. So these guys were the perfect animals to study when looking at how microgravity, or the absence of gravity that we experience in outer space, impacts these residents and their balance. So the first one, going back to this mummichog here, that's not how they looked in outer space. This was just my artistic interpretation. They were actually controlled in an aquarium setting as well. But scientists wanted to see, like I was saying, how their balance was impacted by the absence of gravity. So fish get dizzy a little bit different than humans. When humans are exposed to the absence of gravity, we get a little nauseous, maybe a little dizzy. But these guys, what happens is they don't know which way is up and which way is down. So they start to spin in loops and circles like that. So what they did is they sent 2 adult mummichogs and 50 eggs. So those were fertilized eggs getting ready to hatch any day. They sent them into outer space, and they wanted to see if these guys were able to acclimate to that zero gravity. And guess what? They actually were. So the adults, it took them about 3 days to fully get neutral and to figure out which way was up and which way was down. But the juveniles that were born actually took them a matter of minutes, which is really exciting to see. Just goes to show how well adapted these guys are to survive in almost any situation. And then taking a look at this oyster toadfish here, These guys were sent into outer space because almost all fish have a bone in their inner ear called an otolith. And so that's what helps them to balance. So scientists wanted to see over a long period of time, would this bone change? Would it get smaller? Would it get larger? What would happen? And it remained completely the same. Nothing changed, and these guys were able to adapt. So it just goes to show you how well these guys are able to survive in any condition. But the true survivor of outer space travel is this guy right here. So for any of you that this is their first time seeing it, highly recommend going on an internet exploration of these guys. So this is a tardigrade, or a water bear, and these guys, we would find them in Narragansett Bay watershed because they like to hang out in moss and lichen. So I definitely enlarged this guy so you could see it. But these guys are about 2/100 of an inch long, so you definitely need a microscope to see them. We can't really see them with the naked eye. But these guys are actually found on every single continent on our Earth. They're found in volcanoes, they're found in the Amazon rainforest, they're found in Narragansett Bay watershed. Pretty much anywhere there's land, you can find these guys, which is really amazing. So the special thing about these guys is when conditions are not favorable, maybe in the environment, they can actually curl into a ball. When they are in that ball, they are virtually indestructible. They can survive temperatures of up to -400 degrees Fahrenheit, and they can survive temperatures of up to 300 degrees Fahrenheit. They can live without water and food and oxygen for decades. So they're super, super cool, and if you want to learn more, I have attached a link below, so you definitely can get into that exploration. So scientists started to notice this behavior of this animal on land, so they figured, why not expose it to open outer space? No protection like these guys had. Remember, the only condition they were exposed to was that absence of gravity, so they were exposed to zero gravity, but these guys were sent straight into outer space.
Can you confirm -400 degrees Fahrenheit? That's really amazing. Jesse Sullivan there thinks that's amazing too.
Oh, good. Yeah, I think so too, Jess and Adam. These guys, as I was saying, they're sent into outer space. So they had no oxygen, no food. They were exposed to temperatures of up to -450 degrees Fahrenheit. And they did that for 10 days. And once these guys were rehydrated and taken out of their ton, that circle structure, that protective circle structure, they were actually able to reproduce and survive. So these are the ultimate survivors on our planet. Some people might think that they're actually not from this planet, which I might agree with you too. So looking at these residents, why would we send them into outer space? So studying these guys on Earth in extremes is really amazing, but seeing them in a different, more extreme condition definitely helps scientists kind of pave the way for what it looks like maybe for humans to travel long-term in space, and also to help us survive long-term on Earth. So what scientists are currently studying is to see how microgravity might impact our balance, our sleep, blood pressure, and nervous system development. So today, all the animals that are in outer space being tested are helping scientists to prepare for missions maybe to Mars, and even missions to live on the moon. So some really cool things these animals are helping us do today. So if you guys are ready, I'm super excited to introduce you to two of those residents that have been into outer space. Unfortunately, I don't have a tardigrade here today. I wish that I did, but we're going to get to meet an oyster toadfish, and as well as a mummichog. So if you guys ready, we're going to come on over here. Beautiful. So Adam, if you can zoom in, I would love to show you all our oyster toadfish. So this is a large adult. And these guys are commonly found in oyster beds within our bay, as well as muddy bottoms. And you can tell by the color of that oyster toadfish just how well camouflaged they might be for those habitats. So
we do have a question. Sure. Jesse's wondering if you know what animals are being sent into space these days in 2020.
Oh, great question, Jesse. So I know right now a huge push for life in space is actually plants. So we're trying to see if plants could grow in this microgravity situation, as well as these different conditions, so that we would have fresh food for astronauts and those animals in space. But two, they're also trying to take a look at different rodents like mice, gerbils, things of that nature, to see how they would do over generations in space and see if that impacted them. Because as far as studying animals, they're pretty closely related to humans. So great question, Jessie. Thanks for asking. So this oyster toadfish is actually very unique. So most fish have scales all over their body to protect themselves, but this grumpy looking fish actually has a mucus layer all over its body. And on top of that mucus layer, sometimes you can find even warts. So kind of gross, but very cool nonetheless. So if you look at this fish, you'll see these nice large pectoral fins. I hope I'm doing a good job pointing to them. So those pectoral fins help them kind of stay anchored in caves. So that's where they prefer to spend their time. That's why maybe some of you might have never seen them before.
So we do have another question here. So May wants to know, how long is this fish?
How long is this fish? So they can get to be about 1 foot in length. So pretty big. And we have a juvenile that we'll show you in just a minute, so you can see how teeny tiny they start off.
Yeah, and this one right here is probably closer to about 10 inches long, something like that. So he's getting closer to full size.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. So like I was saying, they use those pectoral fins to stay anchored in their caves. So they're pretty elusive fish in the bay. You might not often see them. And these guys have been found in caves of all types. They've been found in caves that are made out of rocks, but they also like to hang out in human debris. So they've been found within tires, within soda cans, you name it, and they don't mind. They can hang out in those conditions. So you might be wondering, why does it have that really funny name, the oyster toadfish? And it comes from many different reasons. So for one, Adam, I don't know if you can show us a view on the top, just so we can see how big this guy's head is. So if you look at our oyster toadfish, it's got a very skinny, narrow body, but its head is massive. And the reason its head is so huge is because it can actually crush open oysters with that powerful jaw. So I don't know if anybody at home has tried to break a shell on their own. You need a tool pretty much to do it. We can't do it with our bare hands, especially those oyster shells, but these guys can. And really cool, since we put this oyster toadfish in here, he has actually pooped up a mussel shell. So if you can see that at the very bottom of his tail, I know it's a little tricky to see, it looks like part of his tail, but that is the shell that has gone through his body and he's pooped it out, but he's eaten that yummy gooey inside of the mussel. So the toad part of their name comes from a couple different ways. For one, if a male oyster toadfish really wants to impress a lady oyster toadfish, he can actually make a croaking noise that almost sounds like a toad or a frog. So I don't have a beautiful voice like Captain Chris, and I'm not going to attempt to make that noise, but if you guys want to see a video of it, it's also linked below. It's a very interesting noise these guys make by moving muscles and their swim bladder. So once an oyster toadfish attracts that lady friend, she will actually lay her eggs all over his beautiful cave. Oh, he's turning around for you so you get to see all the angles. What a model. And then those little hatchlings will stay in the cave with the male for a while. He'll do some fanning of the eggs to make sure there's no debris on them and things like that. And when they come out, they actually look like tadpoles. Hence another reason they're called the oyster toadfish. But like I was saying to you guys before, these guys can live in all sorts of crazy extreme conditions. So they can live in very polluted waters. Remember, I was saying they can be found in caves that are made out of human debris and things like that. They can survive with little oxygen and varying salinities or salt in the water. So I did want to show you one really cool thing. I know I talked about those juveniles, and we actually have a juvenile or young oyster toadfish right over here. So this one has actually been hanging in a different exhibit as this adult with lighter color rocks. So you can see that it definitely has changed a little bit in color to help blend in and adapt to that environment. But this little juvenile oyster toadfish essentially looks like the adult, but just a mini version. I thought it was really cool to include so you guys can see them at different life stages. Beautiful. Does anybody have any questions about these guys so far? No? Beautiful. Oh, well, if you do, please feel free to comment below and I will try to answer those questions to my best of my ability. But if you guys are ready, I would love to meet those first aquanauts, those mummichogs, and learn all about their amazing adaptations. Beautiful. So Adam, whenever you are ready, we're going to start to move on over. And we're going to give a brief tour of the aquarium while we go around. You'll get to see some residents you might have seen on different videos. I know Bowser is taking a nap over there in his exhibit. But we're making our way to our salt marsh exhibit. And in here you see these beautiful fish right here. So these are our mummichogs. And mummichogs is kind of a funny word, but it's actually a Narragansett tribe word that means going in crowds. And if you look at these guys, they are a schooling fish. They like to hang out in schools of up to several hundred. Like I was saying, these guys hang out in salt marshes, which they're a super important habitat within Narragansett Bay, but they're actually a very hard habitat to live in for these guys. So we'll talk about how these guys are able to survive in such a dynamic and changing habitat. But I do want to talk a little bit about this fish first. So we do have both male and female mummichogs in here. Females actually get a little bit bigger than the males, but they're more plain looking. They don't have as fancy of colors. So some of these fish, I know it's going to be hard to point out, but you'll see the top fin on their back. Some of them actually have some dark splotches and a little bit more pretty colors than the females. So those are the males. But in this species, the females are actually the ones that try to impress the males. Unlike the oyster toadfish that croak to their females, the females in this species, when they're trying to impress a male, they'll actually show them their silvery bellies. So it's kind of an interesting way to attract a friend of a different sex. So really cool. So these guys, like I was saying, they're very adapted to live in salt marshes. And a really cool fact about them is these guys are actually used as a biocontrol. So what that means is these ones, they like to eat mosquito larvae. So mosquitoes when they're in their juvenile state. And they can eat up to 2,000 mosquito larvae a day. For one mummichog. And if these guys can swim in schools of several hundred, they can definitely help to reduce the mosquito population numbers. So in some areas, they actually reproduce and put more of these guys into salt marshes to help reduce mosquitoes because they're pesky and sometimes humans don't really like them too much. So a cool thing that these guys are doing to help our environment. But like I was saying, they do live in that salt marsh and they are exposed to different levels of salinity, different levels of oxygen, and even different levels of water. So in salt marshes, the tides go in and out each day, and these guys like to hang out in the shallows. So sometimes in their habitat, they have this much water, but sometimes also in their habitat, they have no water whatsoever. So these guys are actually able to bury themselves in the mud and survive for several hours without any water. And even when they hibernate in the winter time, they do that as well. They dig themselves in the mud and stay there for several months, which is very cool to see. Also, these guys, if there is no oxygen in their water or not enough for them to breathe, because like these guys and like us, we all need oxygen to breathe. These guys mostly get their oxygen from the water, using their gills to take in that dissolved oxygen. But sometimes when there's not enough, these guys can actually breathe air. They stick their little heads up at the surface and they will breathe that air for as long as they need be. So they can survive out of water, breathing air for a couple days. Really weird to think about for these fish. Another really amazing adaptation with these guys is that they can live in varying levels of salinity. So to put it into perspective, fresh water has no salt in it, right? So we like to break it up into a fraction. So there's 0 parts of salt per 1,000 of fresh water. The open ocean is about 35 parts of salt per 1,000 of water. These guys can live anywhere from freshwater, so that's 0 parts per 1,000, all the way up to about 100 parts per 1,000 of salt, which is really, really crazy. Not many animals can live in those conditions. So no wonder why scientists sent these guys into outer space to test them and see if they were able to survive such conditions like microgravity. So before we wrap up today, I really wanted to feed these guys for you, just so you can see kind of more of their schooling behavior. So like many of our videos before, we are feeding these guys, kind of looks a little gross today, but we're feeding them a mixture of 2 different types of shrimp, myces and brine shrimp. But these guys in the wild, like I was saying, they eat mosquito larvae. They'll eat all sorts of things. They're not picky eaters whatsoever. And you can see these guys going to town, and imagine what they could do in a salt marsh habitat. They're one of my favorite fish to watch eat. Super cool. And we can see both those males and females swimming together. And we also have a killifish and a striped stickleback in here as well. So if you see fish that look a little bit different, it's hard for me to see them right now, but they're definitely in there too. They like to coexist and sometimes even school together. Very cool. Well, thank you guys for hanging out with us today. Do we have any questions, Adam? No, beautiful. Well, if you guys do have any questions after this video, feel free to comment them down below. I'd love to hear from you all. And if you're also tuning in from any schools, let us know. We'd love to know as well. But thank you for exploring these really amazing adaptations with me of these animals. So I know commonly people kind of skip over these animals when they come to our aquarium, but they're endlessly cool. And we really like to highlight just their amazing adaptations and things like that. So we will be back here tomorrow morning for another breakfast at the bay. But if you like what you're seeing here and you would like to donate, there's a link below with Save the Bay's ongoing efforts and things like that, and ways to get involved. Thank you guys for another wonderful breakfast by the bay. Enjoy this lovely day we're having outside today. Thank you guys.